I'm the director here at the library. I'm really thrilled to welcome Shannon Bowring here tonight. She is the author of The Road to Dalton. It's her debut novel. It's a beautifully written novel. I highly recommend it. Shannon has been nominated for a Pushcart and a Best of the Net. She was recently selected in the Best Small Fictions. She holds an MFA from the University of Southern Maine Stone Coast program, and she currently resides in Maine. We also have books for sale after the talk.
Thank you. So, hello, I'm Shannon Bowring. And this is my book, The Road to Dalton. And it's hard to talk about the book without talking a little bit about myself and my own background. So I was raised in Aroostook County in a tiny little town of about 1,300 people. And it's a really beautiful place. Not quite as beautiful as here, but it could give it a run for its money. Lots of lush forests and rolling green fields, big open sky. But I never really felt like I belonged there. I didn't really do a lot of the activities that make the area so good, like hunting and fishing and camping. I was an indoors girl. I would rather be nestled up with a book on the couch than in a tent. So I always felt a little bit other than everybody around me. And emphasizing that otherness was the fact that I was born with 2 congenital heart defects. So I spent most of my first 6 years in and out of hospitals, and I couldn't be exposed to other kids because of my immune system. And I had 2 open heart surgeries. So I had a lot of anxiety, which in 1990s, rural Maine, nobody really talked about that. It was kind of just assumed that because they had fixed me physically, like the mental aspect of it never entered the conversation. But luckily, even though I was dealing with a lot of anxiety and just pent up, this feeling of constant dread is basically what I felt as a 6-year-old child, which is fun. Luckily, I had books and stories that I could lean into, thanks to my parents. So to cope with the anxiety and the otherness, I was constantly reading Boxcar Children, Babysitter's Club, and it didn't take too long for me to realize that I would like to write my own stories. And through writing, just as through reading, I could escape into a different world that wasn't Aroostook County and that wasn't a hospital. Hello. And as I grew older, even though I was still using writing as an escape into different worlds far from Aroostook County, I kept writing stories that circled back to this little town, very much like the one where I grew up, which I call Dalton. I tend to not name the town just because I want to give them a little bit of space. You could figure it out if you read the book. But all of my stories kept going back there because even though I'd never quite fit in, the place itself is so ingrained in my DNA. I can still remember every street, every store in this tiny town, every field. And I really love stories where place informs and influences characters and where it takes on its own sense of character, such as in Winesburg, Ohio, or Country of the Pointed Firs by Sarah Orne Jewett, who we all love. So when I joined Stone Coast MFA program, we needed a thesis. And so I thought, how about I try to pull all of my little stories of Dalton together into either a linked collection or a novel, kind of an a la Olive Kitteridge type thing, choose your own adventure type structure. And so that's what I did. That's kind of how this book came to be. I wrote it during the pandemic, which was, I'll circle back to that. We'll talk a little bit about that. But I think the best way to introduce you to Dalton is to just take you right in. So I'm going to read the prologue. Imagine this. You are driving alone on a road in northern Maine. Your head's still humming from the monotonous drone of I-95, that empty highway. On the radio, nothing but static and outdated country music. A couple miles back, you passed a dingy tagging station where men in orange wool hats and vests stood beneath a massive wooden scale, bull moose hanging upside down before them. Dark blood on the dirt, dead tongue out of the mouth and flapping. The scene passed by so fast, you wonder if you only dreamed it. All those men, laughing as the moose swung in the bitter wind. This is Aroostook County. You follow Route 212 west until it ends at Route 11. Then you turn right, heading north at a faded green sign, Dalton 42, Fort Kent 83. On either side of the potholed road, conifers and bare deciduous trees reach toward the sky. Stubborn banks of snow cling to the shoulder. Your stomach sloshes from last season's frost heaves. You roll the window down for a quick hit of decaying leaves and cold, clean air. It takes 3/4 of an hour to reach the tiny hamlet of Milton Landing. You slow as you pass a scattering of buildings, rusty trailers on cinder blocks, general store, bait and tackle. To your left, a wide, slow river snakes its way northeast, blue ice skimming the surface. The sky is heavy with clouds. You pass a lumber mill, where towering stacks of logs and plywood lie on the ground. You may or may not know this, but most of the men in Dalton and Milton Landing and Portman Lake and Barron make their meager living from trees. They operate kilns in the mill, or they schlep into the forest to mark trees for slaughter, or they drive the 18-wheelers that carry the timbers back here to the lumberyard, the dark and dirty beating heart of an entire region. Inhale the smell, wood pulp and spruce sap and pine resin. Taste it in your mouth, feel the sawdust coat your teeth. Soon the road widens, the forest retreating to the edge of open fields dotted with clumps of ice and snow. By now, the clouds are so low, they might as well be sitting on the treetops. No sun. The landscape takes on a depressing palette of gray, white, and brown. You pass no other vehicles. This empty road is eerie, maybe haunted. When you pass an abandoned church with yellowed clapboards and broken windows, serious doubts creep in. You wonder why you took this road at all. But you've come too far to turn around. And where else do you have to go? What else do you have to do? You must keep moving, just a little further. You pass farmhouses and double wides, collapsing barns that sink into the earth. Down an unmarked side road, the looming silhouette of a potato house. Trees and more trees, half-frozen fallow fields. Another potato house, more trees. Just beyond a small park containing little more than a metal jungle gym and a horse racing track, you crest a high hill and pull over to the shoulder of the road. Turn off the ignition and step into the gray chill. Stretch your legs, feel your tired spine crack and settle into its familiar ache. The only sound is the distant thrum of something mechanical, some low-throated throb of chainsaw or motor. Take a few steps further and look around you. Spread out in the valley below is Dalton. You squint, counting 3 spindly church steeples, 1 blinking yellow light at the bottom of the hill. You see a gas station, an empty dirt lot across the street from a convenience store. A bullet-marred sign to your right assures you that Dalton, population 1309, is a DARE drug-free community. Smoke billows out of chimneys on rooftops, missing shingles like gaps in nearly toothless mouths. Wasteland. But something like a magnetic pull coming up from the cracked pavement beneath your feet compels you to get back in your car. Put your hands on the wheel. Keep moving forward slowly and steadily, straight into the heart of Dalton. So that is my establishing place and establishing that Dalton it's a very own character in the book. in my experience and in most of the other characters' experiences, there's really no other place quite like Dalton. It's its own animal, you could say. And throughout the book, I touch on the fact that Dalton as a character is good and bad. In some ways, you have the positive aspects of a small community. The sense of history and roots. All your friends and family are here. You love the land. You connect with the land. There's a sense of independence and freedom in Aroostook County. You kind of feel like you're not connected to the rest of the world. But there's a flip side of that feeling of disconnection. And because the book is set in 1990, which I'll give a little more info in a second, it's very disconnected from the world in not always positive ways. And so even though you have these positive aspects of a small community, you have some of the more negative aspects, such as mental illness and the fact that mental illness is stigmatized, the fact that there's not a lot of support services in place for that sort of thing. You have a lot of people dealing with addiction, domestic abuse, generational trauma, and homophobia and racism. So the good and the bad. And the reason I said it in 1990 was I was born that year, so I think it's a good year. And when I think back on Aroostook County, I remember it in the 90s, which another way it's kind of a unique place is 1990s in Aroostook County felt very much like 1975 or 1980. Takes a while for things to trickle up I-95 and into that world. And I really wanted to emphasize that even though these characters are in a small community and they're very much in touch with one another, communication is a problem for them. And so I didn't want to make that any easier by bringing in cell phones or the internet, because now, even if you live in a tiny place, you're so connected to, the rest of the world. I really wanted to make Dalton as insular and isolated as I could. And I like the pop culture references in 1990, all the music I got to refer to in this, which was the music my dad introduced me to, like Bruce Springsteen and Bob Seger. So that was kind of a fun fit. But that 1990 setting really just emphasizes this culture of silence, which exists in Dalton, wherein you're close to your neighbors, you would do anything for them, but you're not going to talk about the fact that you have panic attacks or that you're experiencing postpartum depression or that you are a woman attracted to your female best friend. These things just aren't talked about in Dalton. And that's a great way to kind of segue into the characters, all of whom I love, except for a couple, because you have to have a couple bad guys in the mix. So the book is told in multiple perspectives. I felt it was disingenuous to write a book about a town from only one perspective, because as I'm sure you know, in a small town, everybody's stories are bumping up against one another, and you have all these really great intersections and interlapping narratives. And so I also just really like writing in different perspectives because I tend to get a little bit bored with just one. So it was a fun little patchwork kind of puzzle to write the book using these multiple perspectives. So there are several primary characters. Nate and Bridget Thoreau are newly married. They were high school sweethearts. Nate is a rookie cop on the Dalton Police Department. And they've just had their first baby, Sophie. And the baby was born in a little bit of a traumatic incident, this inciting incident that kind of sets everything else in motion. We have Rose and Tommy. Rose is 20. She and Tommy got pregnant with their first kid when she was 16. They now have 2 kids, and he is a jerk. We don't like Tommy. We have Greg Fortin, who is 14. He's my youngest character. He is struggling with an eating disorder, and he is struggling with the fact that he feels attracted to one of his female friends and one of his male friends. Something which is, they don't really have language for that for him. So he feels very much of an outsider in this town. He doesn't quite fit into Dalton. He appreciates the land, but It's not for him. And then we have Nate's parents, Bill and Bev Thoreau, very salt of the earth people. Bill has worked for a long haul trucking company for years, but he's hurt his back, so he's out of work. And he's struggling with that. I think that in a community like that, with the people I grew up with, a lot of men, that's their identity, is their job and their work. And he's just kind of stuck at home, and he's not doing well with that. And then we have Richard and Trudy Haskell. Richard is the town doctor. He inherited his father's old clinic, and he cares for the people of Dalton, but it's not quite a job that he feels that he necessarily wanted. But his sense of responsibility to the town keeps him there. He has a bit of a martyr complex too, which, some people do, but that's okay. And then we have his wife, Trudy Haskell, who is the town librarian. One of my favorites, very outspoken. She'll tell you if she has a problem with you, but she's also very soft-hearted and generous. And she and Bev Thoreau are best friends, but that relationship extends beyond that of best friends. It's kind of an open secret that their husbands both know about, but again, it's not discussed. And I just loved writing about Bev and Trudy because their relationship surprised me, and I love their banter between each other. And even though something happens in the book that challenges this stable relationship that they've had, the stable friendship, but Bev still finds a way to take care of Trudy in the way of sending Greg Fortin to Trudy's house to help her in the garden. And because we're here in this beautiful library, I thought it would be great to just kind of introduce you to Trudy and to her interesting relationship that she develops with Greg. Trudy doesn't have kids of her own, but she and Greg are kind of, they're pretty well matched. So I would like to read an excerpt of that for you, if I can find it. A lot to look at, but not much to see. This is the first thought that flits through Trudy's mind when she opens the door to see Greg Fortin standing on her front porch in a B-52's t-shirt. 14 years old and wide enough to block out the sun. A yellow Walkman the size of a brick pokes out the back pocket of his jeans. Light brown hair matted to his temples with sweat. He smells sweet, like the powdered sugar donuts on display near the cash register up at Bergeron's. By the looks of Greg, Trudy guesses his mother doesn't try too hard to stop him from adding those donuts to the conveyor belt at the last minute. Impulse buyers. Trudy has almost as little patience for impulse buyers as she does for people who come into the library expecting her to find a book when they don't even know the title or the author. But I'm pretty sure it's got a blue cover or maybe green. Hey, Mrs. Haskell. Greg offers up a shy smile, revealing a line of clean, mostly straight teeth. Dad said he heard you'd pay a few bucks for someone to help you in your garden. No need for that damn formality. Trudy hasn't spoken yet this morning, and the phlegmy sound of her voice makes her feel off-balanced, embarrassed. I may be married, but I'm no missus. And who said I needed help? Greg shrugs. Some customer, I guess? Jim Fortin owns the hardware store, and Cheryl, a stay-at-home mom, makes Christmas wreaths out of her garage. Trudy regularly sees Greg's sisters at the library. Sarah, 17, likes Jane Austen, and Amy, still in grade school, has been stuck on the Babysitters Club for a year. But it's been a while since Greg came in. Last winter, maybe. Before he saved the Muse girl when she fell through the ice down at the river. Trudy doesn't recall the boy being quite so rotund the last time he checked out a stack of books. But she does remember he had better literary taste than the average teen. Steinbeck and Rachel Carson, Baldwin and Louise Dickinson Rich. Trudy steps onto the porch, pulling the screen door shut so Mycroft can't sneak outside. She can hear him in the kitchen, his double paws padding across the freshly swept laminate. Do I seem like someone who needs help? She asks Greg. Do I look old, arthritic? Greg takes in Trudy's lounge pants, her bleach-stained sweatshirt. She can smell her hands, the lemon vinegar solution she was pouring down the kitchen sink when he knocked on her door. Nah, he says, but maybe you could give me some work anyway? No, she doesn't want any help, especially not from some kid who probably can't tell a pansy from a petunia. Can the boy even get down on the ground to weed or haul himself back up again? Then she hears a voice in her head that sounds an awful lot like Bev. Damn it, True, don't be such a grouch. You know anything about gardening? Mom and I tried to grow tomatoes once. Were they edible? Not really. But Dad says you need help with flowers, not tomatoes. How much do you expect to be paid? Whatever you think is fair. And what could a boy your age so desperately need money for? Corn, booze, and cigarettes. What else? Playful glint in his brown eyes. Trudy can't help it. She laughs. The boy might have something she doesn't come across often here in Dalton. Fire. I'm too busy to teach you anything today, Trudy says. But if you come by first thing tomorrow morning, I'll let you do some weeding. I might even feed you if you're still here at lunchtime. Cool, he says. I like egg salad. Trudy watches until Greg reaches the end of Winter Street and turns left onto Howard, that yellow Walkman flashing under the sun. The air smells like spent flowers. Heat bugs whine from the hemlock trees. Summer dying slowly. Most of the time, Trudy is incensed that the library is only open Monday through Thursday. People like to read on weekends too, you know. She'd protested when Ollie Lavasser proposed cutting the library's funding a few years ago. But today, this muggy Friday morning, she's relieved she doesn't have to go to the library. She'd be no use there today anyway, distracted and fidgety as she's been since Mycroft woke her up by batting at her cheek with those big white paws. She's got to keep herself busy here at home until she meets Bev at Frenchie's at 5. Finish cleaning, balance the checkbook, weed the garden, water the garden. It's not until Trudy is kneeling in the sunshine, hands coated in dirt, that her nerves finally settle. The asters are still going strong, but the hydrangeas have begun to fade. Pink petals turning pale green, brittle. Honeybees and butterflies flit around the heliopsis. In the pines, sparrows try to sing louder than the heat bugs. The air is thick and pungent with the growth and decay of mid-August. Most people assume she's just a bitter middle-aged librarian, brandishing overdue slips and shushing patrons. And true, she may be a little impatient, maybe a lot impatient, but she's never shushed anyone in her life. And she often waives overdue fines if a person is polite. Almost always if the person is a regular and forgot to return the book because of a sick kid or a job that takes up 14 hours of their day. The real problem, Trudy suspects, the real reason she has a bit of a reputation, as Bev puts it, is that she's not afraid to voice a strong opinion. And despite the fact that it's 1990, for Christ's sake, and the world has supposedly made all sorts of progress, a woman with a mind of her own is still considered problematic. The fact that she and Richard never had kids doesn't help. No one comes right out and says so, but a woman who chooses not to have children can't be trusted, not completely. But look at these flowers, the bees, the birds, the butterflies. Is this not another way of creating life? Inside the house, the phone rings. Trudy checks the sun in the blue-white sky, almost noon. No doubt it's Richard, calling on his lunch break to ask her something foolish. Did you pay the water bill? Do we need milk? What was the name of that agent at the insurance office in Prescott, the one who smelled like pickles? All the familiar questions of a marriage. Sweat rolls down Trudy's spine under the droopy cotton of her bra. Her back aches from pulling weeds, and there's an empty pang in her belly that reminds her she hasn't eaten anything since her toast this morning. The phone keeps ringing, but she stays with her flowers. To hell with it. To hell with it all. And that's Trudy. And I think in her own way, Trudy doesn't quite fit into Dalton, but it's a little bit different for her than it is for Greg because she's just so rooted to the area. Yeah, so those are a few of my favorite characters. Nate is definitely another favorite character. He kind of started the whole ball rolling. I've always known kind of what happens to Nate, but I didn't know how we got there or what happened after that happened. So that's what writing the book was for me. And there's another character who I identify quite well with. Her name is Alice, and she is a writer from away. She grew up in Portland, where she met her husband, Roger, who grew up in Dalton. And so she and Roger moved back to Dalton to help take care of Roger's mother, Nora, who's another one of the not so lovely characters of Dalton. And Alice is wishing, or she's hoping that this time in the county will help her write. Because in Portland, she was stuck in a job she didn't like. She was an aerobics instructor, so she wore a lot of leggings and Lycra, which isn't really Alice. But she's hoping that being in the county will inspire her writing. She'll be ensconced in this beautiful landscape and she'll just, write the great American novel. But she's been struggling a lot since she got to Dalton, not only with her writing, which is not going well at all. She's been there 6 months and hasn't written a word, which I don't know if we have any other writers in the group, but I know how that goes. She's also struggling to, as a person from away, she struggles to fit into the town. And there's a definite sense of no one would be outwardly rude to her. That's not their style. But there's a very clear sense of you are not one of us. And so she's really struggling to fit in. She's struggling with her mother-in-law, who is very difficult. She's kind of an old school generation Mainer who is not very open-minded towards people outside of her own experience. And there's a scene with Alice that I would like to read because it goes back to her writing and how eventually she kind of breaks through the writer's block. And as someone who has had the joy of breaking through writer's block, I thought it would be nice to share. She wakes early one October morning. Familiar routine. Feed Willard, the St. Bernard. Bring him outside, back in for coffee and toast. Writing room. Sacred space, sacred time. Outside, the sun is just a rumor. Pale gray-orange glow on the horizon. Alice sits at her desk, rests her fingers on the keys of her grandfather's typewriter. She usually tries so hard not to think of anyone in her family, tries to keep the hurt away. Sometimes you have to let yourself fall in, be clobbered by it. She closes her eyes and thinks back to the conversation she and her grandfather had as he lay dying of stomach cancer 5 years ago. If I don't see you in the future, Gramp said, I'll see you in the pasture. She was his favorite girl, and he was everything to her. But he was ready to be with his wife, who had died just 6 months before him from congestive heart failure. And he was ready to be with his only daughter, too, Deirdre. Deirdre, who never married and who gave her maiden name to her only daughter, because the father was a stranger of the one-night-only kind, gone by the time Deirdre skipped her period, long gone by the time she gave birth to Alice, long, long gone by the time 10-year-old Alice went to live with her grandparents, Harry and Marjorie O'Neill, after Deirdre was killed by a drunk driver on I-95, one foggy autumn night in '73, 2 days after Halloween. Rotting pumpkins everywhere. Alice's fingers race and stumble across the keys, every sentence riddled with words that might be wrong, but also might be right. What stays and what goes? How do you decide? You decide later. Now, right now, as the sun finds its way above the trees, you sit here and you write them all. And that's not an exact mirroring of what I was experiencing in the writing of this novel, but I mentioned I wrote it in the pandemic, and I was going through a very tough time personally. I was experiencing some health issues, some residual anxiety and PTSD from all of the cardiology stuff when I was little. And writing was my way out of that depression and anxiety. And so when Alice has that moment of finally breaking through the other side, and the fact that she does it in Dalton, and it comes on the feet of Bev and Trudy have taken her out for a night on the town at Frenchie's, and she's starting to feel accepted for the first time. And only after that does she start writing again. And I've always found it wonderfully ironic that the town that I wanted to escape so much has been kind of my saving grace, because without my stories of my hometown, I would just be trapped in my cycle of anxiety and depression all the time. And so I really like that for Alice and for me. Dalton is kind of the way forward, even though it sometimes feels like it's holding you back. And so I think with that, we could open up for discussion, Q&A, if anybody has any thoughts on questions about the book, questions about the writing process, about publishing. I'm pretty much open for anything. What's that?
It was your publishing.
Europa editions. Yeah.
Of course, I'm going Morris Hill. Oh.
Close, close. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
See you all. Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is your first book.
This is my first book.
How long about did it take you to, you said you went through the, did you start it when you were doing the program and stuff?
Yeah, I've had some very rough drafts of stories that I were not good that became part of this book, but I began the book in earnest January 2020, right when everything was starting to get bad and right when I started my MFA program. And I worked on it for 2 years. It served as my thesis. So I finished writing it late fall 2021. And I finished it enough that it worked as the thesis, but it was always my intention to try to publish it through, a hopefully good house, but that's always kind of a crapshoot when you're a writer. So I started querying agents even before I graduated my MFA program. And I was kind of saved from the querying trenches by a wonderful man named Nat Sobel, who found a separate short story of mine, not in the Dalton universe, kind of Dalton adjacent, in a little publication called Raleigh Review. And he asked me if I had anything ready to go. I said, I do. So it very rarely, if ever, happens like that, but that's also how he discovered Richard Russo way back in the day. So it felt very fortuitous and kind of meant to be. Yeah, and then we worked on, he paired me with his partner, Judith Weber. He thought that she and I would have a good partnership, and we do. She and I worked on a few more revisions before she sent it out to query editors. So the entire writing process was 2.5 years. Yeah, but also 32 years. Yeah. I'm writing the sequel right now. I'm very deep into revisions for that. And as I was deep into the revisions, I had kind of an epiphany. People kept asking me if two certain people get together after this story, and I kept saying, no. And then I thought, maybe. So I think that lends itself to possibly a third book, because I think a Dalton trilogy would look pretty good. Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah.
Well, there was a question on you about that, so I think she listened to your very much, so I want to ask it, but
Yeah.
I had a question too, that one thing I loved about the book is there's I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's a
Yeah.
tragic event And I love all the different characters and how it creates a ripple effects, all the characters in this small town and sometimes expected and some unexpected ways. Did you plot that out in advance, or did you, as you were writing, did you kind of realize, oh, this is this character because of this event? Or how did you understand?
Yeah, so I always knew the event was going to happen, but I didn't know how we got there or what happened afterwards. And so it was very much an act of discovering in the process of writing. If this happens, then that's going to affect this character, which affects this character. So it was not a plotted out process. It happened pretty organically. I tend not to be a plotter because I like to be surprised by the characters. They pull me in all sorts of crazy directions, and if I listen to them, it turns out pretty good most of the time. And that's why with the sequel, I'm kind of leaning into what people have been asking, which I was resisting, but we had a very long conversation in the car last week, my lovely husband back there, talking about the what if, and that kind of circles back to the ripple effects. And it goes right back to this tragedy that happens in this book. What could happen from that, good and bad? And I also I just think in life is a ripple effect. I mean, I grew up in this small town, so I could write this small book, this hopefully big book, but in the very beginning of the book, we have a car accident, which sets everything in motion as well. So there's constantly these one thing leads to another sort of connections, which I find really intriguing, not just in my own work, but in literature in general and in life in general. Yeah.
I'm not so familiar with the area. I asked descriptions.
Thank you.
And very you really see, those just great some details. And also wanted to ask you, I missed the opening.
Yes.
I'm guessing that you were very much away from your hometown when you wrote this. Right?
Yes, when I wrote this. So I lived in my hometown until I was 18 or 19. I can't do the math because I was an English major. I'm 33 now. So I've been away for a long time. And I think that space was really valuable for me because when I was a young kid, it was just that kids tend to think that they're better than any environment they're in. And I didn't think I was better than my hometown, but I felt so different from it that there was I had a little bit of a bias that skewed negative, but the longer I've been away, the more I appreciate all the good things that my hometown gave to me. And the more I appreciate that I wouldn't be who I am without it. And even though I would never want to live there again, I still find it the most intriguing place I've ever been. This intriguing little place where not much really happens, but I definitely needed that space to write about it.
Did you find the germs for those characters in your memory of your town, or was it more on the people that you know?
No, so the landscape of Dalton is very much borrowed from my hometown, but none of the events that happen and none of the characters are based on anything real, anything that I actually know. The characters, it's this strange thing where they kind of live as their own separate people in my head. And so they adopt pieces of my personality, but I don't see myself as one character in particular. I identify a lot with Alice. I identify with, Nate in some ways, but they're their own thing. They just kind of hang out in my head, sometimes not talking to me when I want them to, and other times talking too much when I wish they would stop. But yeah, not based on anything, but still very real and very alive to me in their own way.
Have you gone to this mysterious hometown and done reading?
I'm going in a few weeks.
What's that?
In a few weeks. I'll be up there in a few weeks. Yeah.
Be interesting.
Yeah, it will be interesting. I still have friends and family who live there and they've been really supportive, but I think they're all going to be looking for themselves in the book. And I can't control that. I've told them, I've given the warning, like nobody is based on anything, but it's not in my control anymore.
Right.
Once your book is out there, the world takes from it what it wants to. So if they want to see themselves as Nate, then I guess let them see themselves as Nate.
Right.
But it will be interesting to stand in front of the people who saw me in diapers and try to talk about, you know, my life as a professional writer. It will be really, that's probably the one I'm most nervous about, but also most excited because it feels so full circle to go back to the little tiny library where I would check out all my babysitter club books.
My guess is they're gonna be very proud and very flattered.
I-
Because I think people like to be written about.
Yeah,
You know, and it sounds, from what I heard and your description of the book, it sounds like it's not a mean book. It's a balanced look at a small community, which could be any small community.
exactly.
Except for the terrain.
Exactly. And that universality is what's been appealing to every, you know,
Yeah.
Dalton is any town. Dalton is the place where you grow up. It could be in Maine, it could be in Oregon, it could be in Kansas. And so even though, right, the place is specific to this, the stories are not. The community is very identifiable no matter where you grew up. You had said
So
something.
it was interesting when you were talking about the character of the people in the county,
Mhm.
that distance and silence. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think I said at the very beginning, people are always there to help you. They're, you know, the best neighbors I've ever had are up in the county, up in my hometown. But you're not going to sit around talking about your deep emotions and your deep feelings. It's just kind of, I don't want to say grin and bear it mentality because I don't like that phrase, but that's the closest I can think of it, is just kind of, pardon my French, but shit happens, move on with it. That's kind of the attitude up there. And, you know, that can be good or bad. And in this book, I don't know. Each character takes something away, something different away from it. And you had said something about that before, where this balanced view of the town. Greg doesn't love Dalton, but Nate loves Dalton. And so, yeah, in these small towns, you have some people who love it and some people who don't. And that was important to me to present a balanced view of it. So I appreciate that you said
Can't wait to see it.
that. Yeah,
I have a question on Zoom.
sure.
This is about the prologue, the person driving into Dalton in the prologue, were you envisioning that as one of the characters in the story? Was that just like a general?
That's the one that's most me. That's when I'm driving back to my hometown. I just essentially changed a journal entry from I to you. That's the one where you can mostly see me, I think. Would you agree with that? Yeah,
It draws you in.
yeah,
It's nice to have it in a second person. Yeah.
yeah. I thought it was a nice difference from the rest of the book too. Just having a slightly different style and structure, kind of, you know, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever this means, I like. Yeah,
Are you familiar with Island Light, Dancing with Our House Fair?
no,
Oh, okay, that's a Montana. That's a trilogy.
Mhm.
Actually, but just beautiful, beautiful, it's sort of.
oh yeah, I love those. Winesburg, Ohio, Frederick Bachman's Beartown series. I just love a book where it's so richly set in place. I find that really evocative, and I love those details. And yeah.
I heard a bit of Olive Kitcher.
Yes.
in your tribute.
Yes, there's a little bit.
That's so- I can never-
I know, and
It's such a strong voice.
she is. And for me, Olive is so much like so many of the women I grew up with. Just that I'm going to drink black coffee. I'm going to tell you like it is. Yeah, that's what was so great about Olive, is that I think that all of us kind of recognize somebody we know in her. So I'm flattered that Trudy could be compared to her, because she's one of the best contemporary characters there is, I think. Thank you.
how do we buy the books?
Yeah, sure.
It's your community,
Yeah.
and if they read the book or they hear you reading, do you think that reading the book will encourage them to reflect in a different way? Like the way that you said that people don't reflect and don't engage with each other, do you think that it would sort of encourage them to try?
I mean, I certainly hope so. And I do just want to put a caveat that, you know, things might have changed in my hometown by now. Maybe things are more open, but because I haven't lived there, I'm not immersed in that particular culture. So I don't want them to feel like I'm chastising them in the way that they live their lives. But my hope is that anybody reading the book, whether they're in my hometown or not, can use it as a way to reflect on their own experience and their own relationships with people. Yeah.
Because you said it in the nineties, it's not like you're saying, just like.
Right.
It used to be like this.
Yeah, and maybe, you know, I think that it's still a little, I think that they're still a little bit behind, but you know, they are more connected with
Yeah.
everything. So, you know, I don't know. I don't want to speak for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Does your sequel move up into the present time?
The sequel takes place in 95
Oh,
and when I write the third one, I'm thinking that will be 99. So we'll kind of just a nice, you know, book set of 3 set in the 90s, just like take us to the end of the century, essentially.
I love that you're doing it pre-self. I just think that self of the internet make fiction so much less interesting.
It's so awkward to write as well.
What's the point?
Yeah, I agree. I know.
Yeah.
I don't like dealing with that stuff in real life, and I certainly don't want to write it on the page.
Coincidence.
Exactly. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
When you're so,
Serendipity, all the things that make fiction fun.
yes, completely agree. You could not say, I couldn't have said it better than that. So thank you.
pretty bleak for our future though.
Oh, boy.
If we believe that technologies is that, you know, has such a negative effect on both our lives and our literature. It's, I mean, what are people going to write who don't have access to the 90s, right? I mean,
Just keep going back and back.
yeah, but
There'll be a lot of historical fiction coming.
it's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
I mean,
It is.
we have to figure out how to be, you know, have that serendipity and you know, that fuller life that we who have lived through earlier decades think there was, at least, you know?
Yeah.
It's a real problem that I couldn't hear.
You don't read.
That's right.
AI.
Oh, yeah, that terrifies all of us authors. So I don't. It's too scary. I don't like to think about that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's so brave new world. 1984 was the one where they had the novels that were created according to a plan like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary. And it's challenging for those of us who are, you know, creating our own actual artistic content and spending our entire lifetime honing our craft. And then suddenly they say a robot could write a book as good as a person. That's not ever going to be true. It's not,
There have always been
Not
bad books.
there have been very bad books. But at least those bad books were written by real people.
It's like, well, Irish woman, Sally Rooney, right? She's sort of has a bridge.
Yeah,
On an earlier side, I think she has a novel, I can't remember.
No one bacon.
Yeah, no, we
Yeah.
they're writing emails.
yeah,
Last conversation to the comments.
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
Right, right. I mean,
Yeah.
she's trying to make a bridge and the characters are young, she's young,
yep,
and she's trying to, like, I think it's like halfway to
yeah,
texting, you know, the I think she'll do something interesting with this.
Yeah.
She's,
I find her stories very flat. Yeah. You try reading it and then keep going. But everybody's.
I know.
Yeah, I like normal people better than, yeah,
Basic,
yeah.
forceful despite that. You kind of explain this, you know?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
I know.
It's okay.
Or operation plus, you know?
Oh, yeah.
It's really flat. but
Mhm.
it's not like just.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't think you would.
Like lots of books.
I know.
We believe you. It's okay. I catalog books at Patent Free and Patent Free Library down in Bath. And I catalog books for Patent Free Library down in Bath. And so I see all these new books coming in. And there have been so many hits and bestsellers that they're not good. Or like, I didn't like them anyway.
Right.
So, you know, it's all subjective.
Yeah.
And it's funny, at every library I've been to, we've all kind of gone off the rails complaining about how much shelf space James Patterson takes.
Oh, so much.
Because, and half of them aren't even written by him.
Right.
So
It's just provisions.
I think Trudy would have a lot to say about the James Patterson universe. Yeah,
Voice.
yeah. We're
Well,
good.
thank you. Yeah, books are for sale.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. It was lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And kind of back crying.
Yeah, they have